Hello, hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Doing
Hi,
well, doing
everybody.
well. Well, we just came from a confident grief coach class this morning and now transitioning into this interview with a confident grief coach alum, Wesley Merritt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I'd love to introduce Wes. He's just such a awesome, radiant human, and would love to share with the world about what you do, Wes, and your story through grief and just through life, and we'll kind of dive in from there. And I know you have a lot to share and a lot of wisdom to offer to our audience. So I am going to just introduce to our audience here a little bit about you.
Okay.
So Wesley Merritt is a husband, father, certified grief counselor, life coach, public speaker, published writer and photographer, IT consulting executive, and soccer enthusiast. After the death of his daughter, he underwent what he describes as a transformative grieving process that helped his family to survive, normalize, and transcend their situation. West believes that healing is possible for all, but not all are able to work through their grief without support from others that have experienced similar losses. His life passion is in helping others gently transition from the pain of loss into a different normal while maintaining a safe, compassionate, non judgmental, and hopeful environment for his clients. He sees his coaching and counseling pursuits as a way to thank all of the people who supported him through his own challenges and beliefs that we all have an innate ability to heal. He is in the process of writing a book to highlight his firm belief that both healing and growth are possible after loss. He is currently writing a book about his experience of hope and healing and runs a coaching practice for those in need. Oh,
That
what
is
a
the
And
well-rounded
longest
human.
that might be the record introduction of all introductions for sure.
I have to make note of something there, Wes, though. When she was reading it and you were listening about hearing these words about yourself, there was emotion that was really going on in your face. It
There
was
was.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's reflecting back on my journey is one of those things that on one hand it's a little on the embarrassing side because you're kind of open and you're exposing yourself and you're just kind of out there, and I grew up in a very different way than what that is. But then when I hear the litany of things that have kind of gone on, and like I said, it was a little touch of overkill in my mind. Just into, because I wrote it. But anyway, so little touch of overkill there. But at the end of the day, for me, I just think back on this journey, and it's been an incredible journey, and it's one of those where it's really life, right? So for me, I have this tragic event that occurred in the midst of my life, and I was one person, and that was pretty much battle tested. That was pretty much the way the world was kind of, this is what you're supposed to be. And what I ended up doing was I was broken open by this by this loss of my daughter Sarah, and everything from that point on became open and vulnerable, I think, and really just focused in on not the traditional stuff, which was like money, corporate success, greed, all that good stuff, right? It really was focused in on how do you live a good life and how do you support your family, but how do you also help others? So that's kind of the crux, that's the emotion that came up for me. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's deep. There's a lot that goes on in my head that I you know feel and read through. So
How long has it been?
it's been she actually a couple of dates are interesting. She passed in August of 2001. 2000, I'm sorry, 2000. And her birthday is actually on May 10.
Mhm.
So she would be 26 right now. So when she passed, she was 15 months old. And so yeah, it's an interesting time. I kind of, even in terms of scheduling this time, it's May, whatever it is, May 2nd. I think I intuitively knew that I wanted to kind of do it around the date of her birthday.
Yeah, that's
So
beautiful.
yeah, yeah, it's cool.
Well, Wes, would you be open to sharing a little bit more about your story, about your journey, and maybe a little bit about Sarah?
Yeah, I could do that. Probably should open this up a little bit with a trigger warning because it is a little bit intense in terms of the event itself. But let me when I talk about this, and I've talked about this before, but I talk about this as really a story about life, right? And we all know life can be beautiful and life can be messy and life can be hard, in a lot of ways. But when I think about this, it's kind of like, it's reality, right? It is what it is. A lot of people say, hey, after loss of a child, how do you survive that? And what I always tell them is you just do, right? You basically just go through the process and you find ways to try to understand what everything means in your life and what that all looks like. You have to look at your grief, and really at the end of the day, it's just one of those cases of being open, but you can grow. And I've had a lot of blessings that have come since Sarah passed. So let me go back to the beginning a little bit. I think that's probably the important part. I was a normal guy. Sarah passed when I was about 30, 34, 35 actually. And just a normal guy. I kind of grew up outside of New York City. The goal was corporate climbing, success, education, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a very, very normal life. And, I kind of had a good corporate career. I finished my MBA and I kind of went through all of the stuff, former soccer player. So I kind of lived life like a bit of a competitive athlete, and I managed a bunch of people like a competitive athlete. So I wasn't necessarily the best person to manage people at that point in time. But I finished my MBA in 2000, and in January of 2000. And every year my family goes on a beach holiday or a mountain holiday. It's either a beach or a lake. We kind of slip back and forth. And in 2000, what we did was we rented a place on the Jersey Shore, right on the beach. We were in a second floor apartment. And we kind of did this kind of late because, and that was really, the second floor was all that was available. So we ended up going to this thing, and, we got there, and, the day, hot, warm, summertime, good feelings, everything is just, absolutely just amazing. You're kind of like, oh, great, I'm going to have a week of rest on the beach. I'm going to come back tan. I'm going to do all of this, all of this great stuff. The first day that we got there was a Saturday. And within an hour of us arriving, my wife, who's from New Jersey, her entire family showed up. And so we ended up having like 20 people at the house and having kind of like a big party in a sense, right? And so it was kind of like, okay, my wife's family likes to invade situations, which is fine. That's just what we do. We're open. And we had a really, really good day. And it was just one of those things. Now, to go back about this whole family thing, my wife, Debbie, is, we've been together now for, gosh, it's 30, married for 30 years. And then, okay, I gotta go. I'm on a bridge here. And so, and then my oldest daughter, Megan, she was born in 96 and she's currently 28. And then Sarah was our second child. And Sarah was born in 99, basically is the way the whole thing played out. So going back to the whole story with the beach, when we first showed up, there was a family on the first floor and we rented the second floor. And I just remember that family being just really, really welcoming and open. I went out to the beach after we arrived. They had already been there for a week. They were there for 2 weeks. And the first thing that happened was they brought out a couple of beers to my wife and I, and there were some Adirondack chairs out on the beach. So we sat there and we actually drank Corona, sunset kind of kicking up. Everything was really pretty. Everything was beautiful. Everything was great. That's the first day. The second day, we woke up very hot, very humid. Storms were in the area and coming. And the one thing about this house that was not optimal was they didn't have any air conditioning, right? So in the Jersey Shore, you kind of open windows and let things blow, and you kind of get your fans going. So I went down to my car at one point. Deb was cooking dinner, or was actually working to get a grill going to cook dinner on the deck outside. And I went downstairs to go into my car to grab some fans out of the back. I had some 2-box fans that I was going to bring up. Opened up the trunk, looked at the box fans, and the next thing that I hear is this blood-curdling scream. And it's the daughter of the family from downstairs saying, "The baby's fallen. The baby's fallen." And this is where the trigger comes in. And what had happened was, and I was, talk about a gut punch, right? You get hit right in the chest. You can't breathe. What the first thing I do is I run to the side of the house where she is, and she's down. She's wrapped in a screen. And so the screen, she was up on a chair, and I knew she was on the chair. And I walked past her and I kind of yelled at her and said, "Get down." And I saw her starting to get down. And I just kept going. My wife was out on the deck. I think she got stuck out there because the grill wasn't working. And literally a couple seconds later, Sarah went through the screen window and fell and then hit her head. That's the shock. That's the hard, that's the chaos. That's the, the minute where everything you thought was normal dies, in my mind. There's kind of like, things that went through my head, after she passed, it was kind of like, this is not the life we choose, but the one we have, right? That's kind of the long-term view of this. Or the other thing was welcome to the club that nobody wants to join. Is kind of the way we're thinking about this. So fast forwarding into this, I told you it's a positive story because it is a positive story at the end of the day. We had myself and the woman who was downstairs, a woman named Jill. She was, probably, and there's a reason I'm bringing her up for later, but she's probably close to 6 feet, blonde hair, beautiful, older than I am, kind of like in a matronly way. But there was some connection. When I first met them, I was kind of like, I know this woman. I don't know why, but there's just something familiar, about her. And what ended up happening was after Sarah fell, she and I were face to face over Sarah while we were waiting for the emergency people to come. Make a long story short, the emergency folks came. We had a huge crowd show up. Everybody's kind of watching, whatever that, 9 yards. We were worried about being able to get her to the medical center because we need to have a life flight or a flight, come in with a helicopter. And they had suspended operations for the day because of the thunderstorms that were out. And so we were there, we knew that, and they said, we're going to take one more run. And so we'll go pick up Sarah and we'll bring her to the hospital. So my wife went on the helicopter. I went in the car and I drove. I don't know how the hell I drove. I don't know. I mean, I just, but because I was in shock and I was kind of, crying and the whole thing, but I ended up getting there and we ended up getting to the hospital. The normal things that you would expect in this type of situation, we're in a room, we're with her at one point. They're worried about a brain bleed. They're worried about her swelling in her head. And they worked on it for hours. They worked really, really hard. It was the Jersey Shore Medical Center. They did what I would say is an excellent job, even though the outcome wasn't the right one. And I think that, my wife and I were actually shuttled into a room after a while. It got to a point where it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, because this happened about 7 p.m. 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, said, okay, look, this is going to be touch and go. We're going to need to wait now because we've done everything we can in the short term. So we're going to keep monitoring. The one thing that I kept hearing from them was we need blood product and we need to find a way to stabilize her temperature. Her temperature keeps wanting to drop. And so those were the two things that kind of came to my mind. So all of this happened. We're in this room. There's a couch there. There's a bed there. For some bizarre reason, my wife and I actually laid down and we actually fell asleep for a little bit. Something about probably an hour later, 4 o'clock, maybe 4:30, tapped me and said, you need to get up. You need to get up and you need to go see your daughter. So I got up from the bed, walked inside. The nurse that was in there, the first thing she said to me, she said, oh, it's good that you're here. Her temperature is stabilized, was the comment that she made. And I'm thinking, hey, she's going to be okay. This is kind of cool. She's on a ventilator. She's in a bed. The scene was somewhat tragic. What I did was I kind of held her a little bit and touched her and prayed and, did whatever I could. And I kind of said, you know what? Okay, this is it. Let me go back and, I've said what I need to say. I'm going to go back inside. I'm going to go lay down. I fall asleep again for maybe, I don't know how long it was, but I got the second knock on me or nod or, little tap to my shoulder that says you need to go back in. And when I went back into the room, I knew she had passed. So I knew at that point in time that she had, her spirit had basically left her body, which is kind of the way we believe in life. We think the body's a container. So her spirit had left her body and that she had gone on. And I cried, I prayed, I didn't really know what else to do. I was just kind of in that spot. And then after I kind of went through my tears, I'm like, I gotta go back to Deb. And so I went back inside to my wife and she was sitting up and she said, I don't know what's going on, but something just bizarre really happened to me. I said, well, what was that? She goes, well, as I was sitting here, Sarah came by and she said to me that I'm going to be okay. And so, this feeling of peace washed over me, and, Sarah's going to be fine. Now, my wife at the time did not know that she had passed. My wife was actually thinking that from a living perspective, she was going to be with us and everything was going to continue to be fine. But we kind of look at it in retrospect. We say, she said goodbye to us, and she told us, you're going to be okay, and I'm going to be okay, and here you go. So that's the outcome of this whole thing, from a story perspective. And I think usually what ends up happening is the next piece is, all right, now what? Here's the grief piece. What do you do, right? And I think from a grieving perspective, I was in delay for quite a long time. I was worried about my daughter Megan, who is my oldest, right? And I was worried about my wife, and I was worried about taking care of them. And I was not sure how to feel, what to feel. I didn't feel for a period of time. After about 4 or 5 months, I came and had a little crash with some things, and said, you know what, I really need to do something now. And at that point, I did two things. I got on a plane and I went to Florida by myself, and I told my wife, I said, I need to take care of me from a perspective of understanding what this means. I don't know. I'm kind of lost. I'm kind of like in this really, really weird space. I know it's happened. I know I really should be feeling absolutely horrible, and I feel horrible intellectually, but I can't touch it. I can't touch the feelings in my chest. And so I ended up doing this trip down to Florida, and was able to actually access. Well, I did access initially. The crash was an access of the first part, right? The second part was when I went down to Florida. I basically went down there for 5 days by myself on the beach, and walked out of there with the most incredible spiritual week of my life. Couple things happened while I was there. I was, kind of spent good time in the sun, but I actually had bought these huge corporate easel papers that were like the 3 feet by 2 feet or whatever the heck it is. And I actually bought 2 of them, and I set them in the apartment, because I was in an apartment by myself. And I actually was writing, what does life mean? What is all this stuff? And I just tried to really just get my head somehow organized around what was going on, because I still kind of didn't know. I know it sucked. I know it was horrible, but I didn't know. So anyway, a couple things happened during that week. I was able to open up a little bit more than I had before. And I really started paying attention to the messages that were kind of floating around. And I think there's this other piece of ability that we all have, that if we slow down and we breathe, and we use the breathe model, but if we breathe, we are able to kind of access more than our ego, and we just able to kind of see with an open eye or clear eyes. So as I'm there that week, probably middle of the week, I had this distinct message that came to me: you're going to be pregnant. You're going to have a son. You're going to have another child. And that was kind of a message for me. I came back. I was like, okay, I don't know how that's going to happen right now, but we got to think about this. And then I kind of walked away, and there was just a lot of connecting to self, connecting to nervous system, a lot of the somatic stuff. I was doing a lot of breathing, and by the end of that week, I almost felt like a prophet. Now I'm like, okay, I have mental illness. I shaved my head at the time. I had a lot of hair back then, right? So I shaved my head, shaved my mustache, everything off, and I kind of was walking around. It's really tan. And as I left that week, I'm like, I'm really, really blessed to at least be able to kind of touch all of this. I don't know what this means right now, but I'm able to touch all of this. I get to the airport. I'm in Fort Myers, and I get to the airport. I don't know. I think I'm dressed like a beach bum pretty much, and walking through the airport. And as I'm walking through the airport, I had mentioned Jill before, right? Jill, the person who was with me when the accident happened. Who walks by me? Jill. And so we did not know each other before. We did not know each other after. And hold on. Yeah, we didn't know each other before. We didn't know each other after, but there was a connection that happened, and Jill and I met. I mean, the hair on my back of my neck stood up. It was just one of those things. We're talking months later, 2 people that have nothing to do with each other. They're connected in a grief event or in a tragic event. And then here we go, a bunch of months later, they're back in touch. And it's totally unplanned, totally not. It was just one of those things where we just, I run around with this concept of there are no coincidences at this point. So I have a bunch of those stories, but to kind of make a long story short, I want to kind of maybe wrap up a little bit so we can talk a little bit about my grief process. The outcome of this for me was embrace life. Basically, once you go through your grieving, I went through a grieving process. I went through my process with counselors. I had some counselors, a grief counselor that I worked with for a long time. I also was walking every day with meta prayer, and that was calming my nervous system in a big way. But I was also kind of getting all spiritual with everything around me. But I think the point was that stay hopeful. My son Zachary was born a year later. Actually, a little bit of a weird story. He actually came home from the hospital on 9/11. So my wife Zach was born on September 9th. We're in Westchester County. My wife, when I went to pick her up, was in lockdown, because of 9/11. I'll give you one little story about 9/11 and hope. My daughter Megan was with me. We were at our house in Connecticut, and Debbie actually called me and said, you might want to put the TV on when 9/11 was happening. And so I said, what's going on? She goes, it's just something happened in New York City. You're going to want to see what goes on. I turn on the TV. Megan's with me now. You sit here and say, okay, look, she's 5, right? I turn on the TV. I see one tower smoldering. And as I look at the TV, the second plane hits. And we're talking about like, holy crap, like what the hell's going on? And so now I've got grief on top of this other confusion saying, what's going on in the world? This is insane. Megan looks at me, and we obviously we're a good bit of time after the accident, but or a year or so. But Megan looks at me, and she's in her 5-year-old, really, really open, precocious way, says, Dad. I said, yeah. She goes, is that real? She's thinking it's a movie, right? Is that real? I said, yeah, it's real. And she goes, oh, did people die? And I said, honey, I don't know. I said, I have to think that people did die. I said, this is horrible. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. I'm sorry you have to see it. And then she kind of gets this face. She's like, she kind of puts this, squirrely face on. And then she looks up with a little brightened eyes and smiles. She goes, well, you know what? The good thing, I said, what good thing? She goes, the good thing is that Sarah's helping everybody get in to heaven. And so those kind of things don't occur without loss. Those kind of understandings don't happen. I mean, I'd give anything to have Sarah back, but, we had Zach. He's phenomenal. He's 23 now. Sarah would have been 26. And then part of our journey was, as I was going through feedback, I kind of used this analogy of I was in a black box for a really long period of time, and then all of a sudden a candle lit. So I was in this box by myself, the candle lit. And as the candle lit, I was kind of given this vision of a prism, kind of like a glass prism, like a crystal. And believe it or not, some old dusty doctor bag that the crystal came out of. And so to me, that was, you're going to go and help the world heal. And you're going to show them the prism of light and the beauty of things that are out there, despite whatever they might be going through. So the last piece of this is, at that point, I decided to go back to school for my MSW. I was going to be a grief counselor. I did, 40 credits or so with that. I got to the point where I was hating money. I was feeling guilty about my career because that was kind of the ego basically said I have to be on the beach on the Jersey Shore. And so what ultimately ended up happening was I went back to school for my MSW. We moved from Connecticut up to the Albany Capital District area, and I went to school at UAlbany. After I got through, like I said, the 36 credits at the time, I think there was like, okay, you got to do field work and you can't do it on weekends, so you have to quit your job. And I said, I hate my job. I hate the concept of my job, but I still need to make money. So I decided to stop that, went to get my bereavement certificate, which I was able to do on top of the MSW, kept working, and here we are. I mean, I'm now I kind of became certified as a grief counselor, and I did a whole bunch of volunteer stuff with, my daughter was an organ donor also. So the organ donation thing, I became an advocate for organ donation and children's grief because of Megan and all of this other stuff. But lo and behold, when we moved to Albany, my wife, she's going to hate me for saying this, but my wife has a tendency not to spend a lot of money. It's just the way she rolls. And we somehow missed the window for the last couple of months of the year for our benefits enrollment. And my wife had been on birth control. And she said, yeah, I'm going to basically just not worry about it until the next thing kicks in. I won't have to spend all that money. Needless to say, my wife gets pregnant. And she comes to me crying, I'm pregnant. You know, there's like the whole thing. And I'm like, why are you crying? She goes, because I thought you didn't want any more kids. I said, I never said that. I said, oh my God, this is life. We're chasing life, man. We're going after life. So then my daughter Hannah was born, you know, a little bit after that. And we actually call her a blessed surprise, you know, and I got to tell you, she's feisty. She's a senior, going to be a senior next year in college. She's an athlete. She's tearing it up, but she is the one that tells everybody what things should be. And she's feisty as all heck. So yeah, so let me pause at that. I threw a lot at you, you know, but that's all. Like there are other pieces to the story that I try to tailor them and whatnot. But let me throw some other things at you, and let's get to grief because I gave you the story. So hopefully that was okay, and everybody's okay. Nobody triggered. It's good.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I was just sorry to interrupt, Cammie, but the themes that kind of, you know, we're all in this work now, right? We're all here because we want to help others who are going through this depth, and your spirituality was like, you know, that was your guiding light in so many ways. And your awareness about the connection of the grieving and your body and how the movement of your body can help you moving forward. And the third thing that really spoke to me is there's a perception out there, and I don't even know that it's factual anymore. I've kind of done some of the research on the numbers that the majority of husband and wives who endure a child loss split up. And I don't know that that's really valid. There's some different statistics out there. And I've known people that kind of get a little pissed off because it's like, no, that isn't the way that it needs to be. And you and your wife are a testimony to that. What kept you glued together?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think the relationship between my wife and I has always been one that we are always together from a perspective of heart and emotion, but we give ourselves really a good bit of freedom to go do what we need to do. So I always kind of think about, now I just passed 30 years, right? So, you know, we've been together for 35. But what the relationship has been is we've given ourselves enough space to do our own thing. We've supported each other in our own thing. And, you know, we come back together. The one piece of advice that I got actually coming out of this after the funeral was do not judge each other in your grief. The message was everyone grieves differently. And your wife is going to handle things in a certain way, and you're going to handle things in a certain way. And where these relationships tend to bog down is when we judge the other party saying, you're not grieving well. You're not grieving well enough. You're not offering this respect. You're not, you know, doing this. And I think that the key of that is to understand, I have this whole weird thing with relationships. Relationships, in a lot of cases, the traditional definition is we're together and I own you. I mean, I hate to pull that and make that really just that blunt, but it's almost kind of like an ownership thing. But if a relationship is more of a, we are two partners of choice and we're equal, then effectively what that does is that allows for this openness, you know, and this lack of judgment. And so my wife and I have always had kind of that mindset, especially after grief. And she and I grieve very differently. I mean, she's, you know, we make jokes about this. I grieve like a female. She grieves like a male. You know, she's a phys ed teacher, you know, so she's very black and white. I'm very, very implication and process and, you know, kind of like spiritual oriented and all that kind of stuff. And so we kind of come from different places, but she went to group counseling and for a short period of time and, you know, compassionate friends and whatnot, and basically said, okay, I've had enough and I'm done. And for me, I had to go to one-on-one because I couldn't do the groups. I mean, so we did that very different. I think that that dynamic of acceptance of each other and the fact that we're individuals and different while we're together is really the outcome there, I think. If that makes sense. Yeah, you know, and now the numbers that we did here early on, Pat, was 80% of couples divorce. that was the numbers that we were aware of early on. Obviously if it's the same today, I don't know, but it was 80% of couples, and so we're pretty proud of the fact that we're still, we're more in love now than we were when we started. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of cool,
Yeah, and I just know with some of the research, and it might be Pew Research or something like that, and it varies. The research is like the type of loss, what time, were there problems before, and I think you had a strong connection with each other, which helped keep you stronger connected with each other during the tragic times, where if people maybe didn't have that baseline, that's where a lot of these statistics might show up, is, and it's not, everybody has a different trajectory. And, I'm going to turn it over to Cammie here in a minute, but the one thing that we talk about too is, I love that you talk about that you have different ways of grieving, and you needed to seek different support. You couldn't lean into each other totally for your support. You have a common bond and the love and all of that, but your grief is very different than your wife's grief, because the relationship that you have and all of that. And that's one of the things that we try to help people understand, and lean into people that aren't necessarily your family members, because they're grieving too. They don't have the bandwidth. You don't have the bandwidth to be able to support each other because you're so in the depths of it.
And I agree with that. And I would also say one other thing. Debbie and I were very focused on Megan as a grieving child, and we knew that Megan's life would be changed forever, as would ours. But we had years of experience in life. I really had not had a loss before Sarah passed, and the only thing I was able to equate my loss to was a girlfriend that I had when I was younger, that we would have probably been engaged, but that breakup was devastating, and the only feeling that I could say was that, right? I mean, I'd lost family members before, but they were kind of either distant or we weren't allowed to go to the funeral. So we kind of were shielded from all of that stuff. So to that point, we learned, and we learned what we needed to do and how to do it, and focus on Megan, which allowed us to kind of maybe rally on the greater good. If it wasn't for Megan, would things be different? I don't think so, but we would have a bigger loss in our hearts. Would we have had other kids? I don't know. We made the conscious choice. I mean, I think we were ordained to have Zach, but I think we made the conscious choice to have him, and to make sure that we were not going to be with a single grieving child. So
So Cammie, just going to throw it over to you. We have about 5 minutes left. So what would you like to ask Wes? And how do we want to? What's the wisdom to leave our audience with?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking was, Wes, do you have any, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who might be going through something similar in some regard, or just in the depths of their despair in a deep loss, what is one nugget that they can walk away with from this conversation together?
If I think about the concept of grief and just how grief has a tendency to play out over time, the first thing I think we get hit with is shock and chaos. I'm not going to go to the Kubler-Ross model, but I'm going to really talk about specifically, I think there's this concept of shock. How do I get my footing back underneath me? For me, the one piece of, and lack of control is another one. So the one thing that I did not have any control over was what was going on. But we were given a choice for organ donation to make, to say, would you like to donate your daughter's organs? We know that she was basically brain dead, but we understand that, is there something that you would you like to donate? And we had a great organ procurement person that we were dealing with, and that choice was able to kind of just give us one little shred of something to kind of hold on to, that put us on a path that said, okay, things have been taken away from us. Now what? And we have a choice, right? So what I always think about here is that there is a moment within grief for everyone that I've probably worked with where they're not sure what to think about it, but they have to make a decision. It's like, do I want to live a good life? Do I want to embrace life? One of my big watchwords coming out of that week on the beach was embrace life, man. It's just like, you know what? Sarah's gone physically, emotionally, and spiritually. She's still around, but, you know, embrace life and make the choice, you know, make the choice to just fight, you know. And I think grief is work. It's hard. And, you know, the old adage is, you know, the only way out is through. So you kind of need to figure out ways to lean in if you can, and really just kind of just be open to that process, I think, is probably the key. The other piece I would say is probably live moment to moment. Just because everything is horrible and falling apart around you this minute, something's going to show up that's going to maybe give you a chuckle. You know, I mean, you know, I'll throw a little touch of gallows humor out there. When Sarah, well, we were shopping for coffins for Sarah. This is kind of really, really dire stuff, right? And because she was a child, all the people around us were like really panicked about how to deal with, you know, a grieving couple. And we went to the funeral home, and it was bizarre because they were showing us caskets, and then the guy was a really nice guy. He was like, "I'll have to show you the budget version." And so he showed me the budget version of a little casket, and it looked like a cooler, like one of those white styrofoam coolers. My wife looked at it. She whispered in my ear. She goes, "Oh my God." She goes, "She's not a 6-pack of beer." Right. And so, that kind of, that was a bit of gallows humor. And so when she said that, she started laughing. Like, like, you're not supposed to laugh in the middle of grief, but guess what? There are moments, and you can't grieve 24/7. You got to figure out more than that. So anyways, I'm kind of long-winded, but I hope that kind of answered your question, Cami.
Yeah, thank you. I love what you said about the choice and like making a decision about what you're going to do next, because so much is out of your control, but there's still choice and decision, and finding those glimmers acted as a force of empowerment and strength to keep you going, because you had the choice to focus on what was next for you, even though you didn't know any of the answers. And like you mentioned, like taking it moment to moment and just needing to kind of ride that wave, but finding those moments where you had that ability to make a decision for yourself about what was happening in your process.
Yeah, and the decision for me was, you have to rebuild everything you were taught. I mean, my everything that I was taught prior to her passing, I said, you know what? I said, I don't know how any of this fits anymore. So part of my conscious choice, when I decided that, okay, look, I'm going to start learning and helping and doing what I'm going to do, was exactly that. It was, you know, you're going to need to rebuild yourself from the bottom up. What's interesting about it is I turned into the kid I was at 14, just in terms of all my values and goals and everything. When I was 14 years old, were kind of in one place, and the world kind of pushes you into another place. And, you know, so what's your true calling? I go back and I say, you know, Sarah, I have to give Sarah credit for bringing me back to myself. You know, it's kind of the way I played that out. And once again, tragedy. I'd much rather be stupid, right? But, you know, reality is reality.
Yeah. Rebuild yourself. That is such a great ending to this conversation. And I'm thinking we'll probably have future conversations with you, Wes.
Okay.
And so appreciate you being here with us and sharing your story. And Cami, any last words to our audience before we sign off?
I just want to acknowledge your vulnerability, Wes. I hadn't heard your story in that detail, and I just got goosebumps throughout this conversation, especially when you're sharing about Sarah. So thank you for voicing all of that and sharing that with us. I'm going to leave your bio and your contact information below in the show notes, if that's cool with you, Wes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, if anyone out there resonated with Wes and his story and wants to connect or receive support in any way from Wes, I'm gonna give you the information below so that you can do so, because yeah, Wes is an amazing human to be connected with. So thank you for sharing your time and vulnerability with us today.
Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for listening. I think, you know, this story is not something that I put at the top of my resume all the time, but because it can be hard for certain people, but I really, really appreciate the willingness to listen and just kind of hear, which is good.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it gets to be top of your resume, right? I mean, this was such a profound experience for you that shifted your life. And you know, it's got
Yeah.
got weight to it, and that's the best kind of education or wisdom that we can take from life, are those telling moments. So yeah,
Yeah,
that gets
exactly.
to be at the top of your top of your list.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm so
Thanks, guys.
appreciative, Wes. I'm appreciative, Cammie, and we're going to sign off. And if you like this, like and subscribe, share this if you know someone who has a journey that may be a bit similar to Wes's. And we just want comment and reach out to Wes if you think that that's, you know, an appropriate thing that you would like to do, or share his information. So we're signing off. Thank you so much. Blessings
Peace,
to you
guys.
all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye now.